We are live. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Unscripted. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Christian Dameff, who is the doctor of a medical director for cybersecurity at his University of California, San Diego. Christian, thank you very much for joining. Much appreciated.
Oh, of course. Yeah, an honor. Thank you for this invitation.
So, medical doctor / cybersecurity. That's probably like the your first year doctor, medical doctor, and then secondly, you're a cybersecurity practitioner. Where do I even start? walk me through like the inception of how do you got to where you are. And it's such an interesting mesh of skill set that I would love to dive in. But how did it get started?
That's a great question. I get that a lot. And I agree. It's kind of a weird mismatch of skills. It really starts out when I'm kind of a cliche, I'm 12, I'm 13, neighbor down the street gets a compact Presario and introduces me to this world of computers, like never having been exposed to it before. The only thing I really knew that was anything close was like a Super Nintendo. And it quickly turned into what every other teenager does when two teenagers get together, there's hijinks, and it develops into a fascination and love of kind of the hacker community. So, sending your friends Sub 7 or BO2K over IRC or Instant Messenger. These were like the classic little pranks and adolescent hijinks. I was so amazed when my own first computer got infected, again from a friend, and the monitor would post a message saying something nefarious, like there's a ghost in your computer, or my CD-ROM drive would eject itself. That type of power, and kind of, as I mentioned, adolescent hijinks.
By the way, I remember
really
those.
Drew me on as
Christian, totally remember. I remember those. Like, they were like ejecting back and forth the CD-ROM. There was some sort of, I can't remember what it was called, but it was a virus, right?
Yeah, classic like Sub 7 or BO2K. These are like the early teenage formative years where I kind of grew up on the early internet and in the hacker space. I loved it. It was never anything I thought I could have a career in. You talk to a lot of hackers nowadays from back in the day, and they said, no, it's like a hobby or part of your identity or something that you were drawn to because you were curious. And in a lot of cases, you're looking for other like-minded people. I never thought I could do cybersecurity as a career. And so I kind of drift around the latter part of my teenage years, and I go to school for philosophy. So I liked thinking deeply about things. It also gave me a great capacity to think about things like not having a job with a philosophy degree. And so about midway through my undergrad, I have the classic, how am I going to pay my bills, thinking about Socrates? And so it turns out you can't for the most part. And I was, thinking about, what kind of careers would I be interested in? And just serendipitously, I went and tried to become an ambulance driver. I thought that was such a cool job to be able to go and be a paramedic or an EMT. So I got one summer, I got my certification. No ambulances, would hire me to drive. Come on, that's not cool. I really wanted to drive an ambulance. But with my EMT certification, a hospital picked me up as a technician. And my first job in the healthcare space was in an emergency department. I'll tell you that.
So those are two separate certifications, the EMT and the ambulance driver, right? Those are like two separate training type of thing, right? And it's so cool, like, because nobody grows up and say, hey, I want to be an ambulance driver. Or maybe they do. I don't know. It's like people say, I want to be a doctor. I want to be a lawyer. I want to be a pilot. I don't know, maybe like, all of the above. But for like to be an ambulance driver, I mean, it is pretty cool. And so you got picked up, and now you find yourself in the midst of, I'm assuming, some sort of chaos, because that's what EMT deals with on a regular basis. And by the way, I've talked to a deputy CISO that does EMT part-time, still does. And he says that there's a lot of like things that are kind of applicable from the stuff that you learn hands-on on dealing with crisis.
100%. I completely agree. So my first job was not driving ambulances, to my dismay. I was not old enough, and they didn't trust me with their, $100,000 ambulance to some snot-nosed teenager. Instead, it was going to the emergency department and helping out the nurses and doctors in the ER. And I'll tell you exactly what you mentioned. It's chaotic. You never know what's going to come through the front doors. It can be a sick 3-day-old child. It can be a dying heart attack from a person who's 105. You have to be prepared for everything when you work in the emergency department. And as a teenager, that really opened my eyes and sparked in me a passion to work in clinical medicine. I really wanted to take care of people. I say this with a little bit of dismay, but also with a little bit of with humility. Hopefully, when you see me in the emergency department, you're probably having one of the worst days of your life. That every day I go to work, I meet people on probably the worst day of their life, and I'll say that is both a tremendous honor to take care of people in the throes of all sorts of types of medical emergencies, strokes, heart attacks, everything. But as well as a tremendous responsibility. I just want to say that I loved clinical medicine. I decided I want to go to medical school after that. So I finished up my undergrad. I studied for my MCAT, got into medical school. And it's a pretty intensive training pathway. So I really still loved hacking. I would go to DEFCON every year. I would have to beg my clinical rotations and my teachers in med school to give me Thursday and Friday off so I could go to DEFCON every year because it was my relief.
Unbelievable. I have to tell you, it's unbelievable because a lot of people, and I've talked to medical students, and you have to stay up like so many hours, and it's so intense, as you mentioned, the whole training, and then you decided so your release would be going out to DEFCON and having hands-on like hacking. Wow, kudos to you that you've decided that this was what you wanted to do. So you did get time off to go to DEFCON.
Yes, I've gone every year since DEFCON 13, for the exception of 1 year when my daughter was born, a few days before DEFCON. But for whatever serendipitous, lucky way I was able to go about it, somehow I was able to convince all of the teachers to let me go. Take a couple of days off of my time. Of course, I'd always make it up, later on in some rotation, work a weekend or whatever it would be.
What was your favorite part at DEFCON specifically? What was like the most attractive piece of it? Just made you drop everything and go?
I'll tell you, there's something special about a hacking conference like DEFCON. It's so different than many of the other conferences in that space, right? So I call them vendor cons. I think a lot of other people do call them something similarly. When you go to some of the larger events where there's so much money being infused from more of the corporate side of security, it changes the atmosphere. It's no longer about learning for the sake of learning or that true hacker spirit of exploring things you shouldn't and learning things that no one else expected you to. Instead, it's I need to protect this particular enterprise. I need to buy these tools, learn to deploy them, hire people. And those are all incredibly important things and a large part of what I do today. But at its core, it's pretty antithetical to the hacker ethos, which is that hackers, they don't need bureaucracy. They don't need permission. They often do the right thing for the sake of the right thing, and they don't worry about hiring or what particular tool they need to buy from a vendor. They don't have project managers. And so DEFCON to me was a release because it gave me the opportunity to get back to my hacker roots, to really to be with my people, right? So these are friends that I developed. I would meet some people at DEFCON that I'd only known online and had been close friends with in IRC for years, and finally get to meet them and do something that we all loved in an environment that was not corporate, not driven by any real financial motivation. And so I'll tell you, that's one of the reasons I go to DEFCON. But I'll tell you my favorite part of DEFCON, and especially older DEFCONs, was walking through the capture the flag area. I grew up as a hacker. I always, I like to say that since I've had to split my expertise in medicine and hacking or computer security, you can never be the best at both, right? And so to walk through the capture the flag area and look at some of the best hackers in the world sitting there competing, racking their brains about how to reverse a binary or finally capturing a flag on some crypto challenge that just had eluded them. That to me it was so inspiring. And so I loved watching the old capture the flag events and even the new capture the flag events, and just how creative the people who put them on were, so how difficult some of the challenges were, the creative solutions, and just kind of also the hacker history and hacker lore. Oh, did you hear what Team Shellfish did last year? They pulled out a 0-day on OpenBSD. When you hear about this stuff, it's hacker legend. And I really love that. I love the lore. I love the culture around hacking, and I love the hacker community. And so going there every year, even when I was training in medical school, truly was a release for me. It recharged me. It was an opportunity to reconnect. And I hope to go to DEFCON and other similar hacking conferences, until I'm very, very old and we do them in the metaverse or something at that point. I hope that it never happens. But
now, Christian, is there any equivalent of DEFCON in the medical field? I'm just curious.
It's a great question. No, I would say all of those conferences are very corporate focused. They have a lot of money, the medical space, right? So pharma will fund a lot of things. Medical device manufacturers will fund them. Registrations, costs and fees for most medical conferences are not a couple $100s. They're often $1,000 plus, a couple $1,000s to go to them. They're very corporate. I had yet to go to a medical conference that had that kind of real gritty provider focused, let's take the money out of medicine side of it, which is really unfortunate. And it's just, I think, a byproduct of how we practice medicine, particularly in the United States and other places, is that it's very expensive. There's a lot of people involved that need to be paid, and this big whole economy around it. So yeah, I don't think there's any equivalent. I got to finish up this story though, real quick. Sure. I'm going to DEFCON during medical school, and I'll tell you, I have this like light bulb moments, and I tell this story for people because I think it's really important. I grew up a hacker, never thought I could have a job in that. So I'm in medical school. On my third year in medical school, you don't do much classroom education. Instead, you move to the hospital and you rotate through all the various parts of the hospital. You go to the psychiatry area or the psych ward. You go to the medicine ward. You do surgery. You do emergency medicine. You do all these different rotations. I'm on my very first rotation in OB, a place where they deliver babies. I'm getting toured around the hospital, and I go to the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. This is the place of the hospital where you have the sickest babies, the premature infants, the ones that come out and need a lot of resuscitation and help, the really sick ones. And I'm walking around, and I see a fetal monitor boot up. And this is a device that's connected to a little tiny baby in one of the incubators, and it monitors their vital signs. What's their heart rate, what's their oxygen levels, these types of things. I see it boot up, and it's running an ancient version of Server 2K. It's just a Windows box, and I see it boot. And that happened so many times, and just for whatever reason, I was walking by when that happened, and I knew, like, a light bulb goes over my head. And I said, "This would be I could own this. This is super easy. Anyone could do this. It was Metasploit, in 5 minutes, whatever it would be." I had almost certainly known that box wasn't patched, it wasn't protected, it wasn't segmented, etc. It's like a light bulb goes off over my brain, and I said, wow, if someone infected that box with malware and it didn't work, like it stopped working, that little baby in that incubator could be harmed, right? If we couldn't detect that their heart rate was going up higher or their oxygen level was reducing in a timely manner, that baby could get really sick and maybe, something really bad happen. This like light bulb moment goes over my brain, and I'm able then at that moment to combine these two things, these two passions in my life, which was clinical medicine and hacking, computer security, right? And to take a line from Josh Corman, this is where bits and bytes meet flesh and blood. I'm worried about not just the protection of sensitive data, which is really important, right? We don't want our data to get stolen or used, identity theft, that's important. But it's even more important to protect systems that support human life. And there's only a few environments where that is, that actually occurs. Critical infrastructure. We talk about SCADA systems, electricity systems, but healthcare, that's all we do. And we have so many connected systems that support human life that are running outdated legacy operating systems or have generally very poor authentication practices or when they were designed that result in hard-coded passwords and all sorts of really nasty stuff, right? So at this point, third year of medical school, I said, I can combine these two passions. I don't have to be a doctor in the day and then a hacker in my spare time. I can combine these two things because at the end of the day, I want my patients to be safe. I can use these skills I know in the computer security world and the hacking world to do that, to raise awareness, to hopefully push medical device manufacturers and hospitals to better secure these systems. And that's a worthwhile endeavor. And heck, what an awesome life that would be. And so that's what I've been doing for the last 10 years or so, is raising awareness about this issue, doing some policy issues, really talking about, again, as Josh Corman mentioned, where bits and bytes meet flesh and blood. Let's do what we should do as a community, as a nation, as a world, and build the resiliency of hospitals and healthcare systems against cyber attacks like ransomware, because the patients deserve it. That's kind of that's where I am now. And I'm sorry for this long-winded buildup, but I think truly, that's kind of the march to it.
Christian, is truly fascinating. And I'm assuming that glimpse of what you saw was just the tip of the iceberg, right? As you've done this in the past 10 years, and they start to unravel the state of medical devices around the hospitals and whatnot, what you just saw, like a quote unquote legacy OS running a critical device, that's pretty common, right? What is kind of the state of the industry today, 10 years later?
That's a great question. I've been called a hopeless romantic and an optimist. I feel like I have to switch over and say
we need more like you, Christian. There's nothing wrong about that.
But when it comes to this question, I think I really have a pessimistic outlook. So listen, this space is not new, and there are a lot of amazing other pioneers in this space. I'll point to a paper that came out in 2008. Kevin Fu, an academic computer scientist and security extraordinaire, worked with a team at the University of Michigan to reverse engineer a pacemaker, right? So this is a device that is implanted into the chest of a patient who needs it, and it connects with a wire to their heart. And this device tells their heart how to beat, how fast to beat. And if your heart ends up getting a critical error, if you end up blue screening your heart, it can shock you out of it, right? It can save your life, just like you see on TV. Like the paramedics say,
Christian, can you just hit reboot? It is a memory dump.
Yeah,
you hit reboot and you'll back up. No,
right. So the way you reboot the heart is you shock the hell out of it. you shock it, and so these defibrillators. These pacemakers can have defibrillators built into them, and they can reset your heart if it tries to kill you. And so Kevin Fu's group reverse engineered this pacemaker and found some, very concerning vulnerabilities in this medical device. This kicks off a whole decade of medical device research. So we had, Kevin Fu did pacemakers. We had Barnaby Jack, who also did pacemakers. He did a classic on-stage presentation where he hacked a pacemaker and said he could kill someone remotely with an antenna, which I think that research is probably pretty accurate. We had insulin pumps. These are little devices that give insulin to diabetics. They look like pagers. They have little tubes that connect to a patient's body, and they deliver insulin. Well, you could hack these things. This is Jay Radcliffe's work and Billy Rios's work about and Barnaby Jack's work on this. We have so much, research on vulnerable devices that we've seen for a long time. The early days around this was all about coordinated vulnerability disclosure, right? So these security researchers would find flaws in medical devices. They'd bring them to the manufacturers. And in the old days, the device manufacturers would just threaten to sue them. They said, hey, we're going to sue you for this. You better get ready to spend the rest of your life in jail. You shouldn't be hacking medical devices.
So there wasn't a bug bounty program for medical devices back then. That's what you're saying. There wasn't. Mm-hmm.
No, they don't. In fact, there isn't much now. I mean, the space is so immature that even something like a bug bounty program would be a really hard thing to do even today. It's also hard, right? Like, so if you have a bug bounty program for like a web app or a website, right? It's publicly facing. Anyone with a web browser can go poke at it and find a vulnerability, right? A medical device is hard to get. You have to buy them. You have to find them so that you can hack on them. So there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of things that like traditional ways we engage in the security research community, like bug bounties, they don't work with medical devices because they're so rare and niche and you can't get them.
So let me ask you this. They're rare and niche, right? So isn't that security by obscurity? The fact that you can't get hold of one and then it's safe by default because you don't have access to one. You don't know what the vulnerabilities are. And so it's quote unquote secure.
That's what a lot of device manufacturers thought until there's this whole until these researchers would buy these devices on eBay. Or in the case of Jay Radcliffe, he himself is a type 1 diabetic. He hacked his own insulin pump, that's connected to his body. So as much as I think device manufacturers would love to rely on that principle of security by obscurity, it's just not the case anymore. And especially as a lot of these devices are becoming more and more connected, more and more integrated into cloud, as well as mobile. So the future of medical devices that people, wear in their bodies and carry on their person are going to be more and more integrated with smartphones. And so the attack surface and the exposure of that is really now extending beyond just the physical device into a whole ecosystem of middleware and mobile applications. And so I guess at the end of the day is like that strategy did not work. And medical device manufacturers had a real reckoning of having to deal with, hey, we can't ignore this problem anymore. You get this 1-2 punch. You have security researchers coming out with research and then the FDA coming out and saying, hey, we approve these devices. We aren't going to stop. We're going to start caring about cybersecurity, right? So as an FDA, as a regulatory authority, we don't think vulnerable medical devices should be on the market. Hey, device manufacturer, what are you doing about this? How are you fixing this? How are you patching these devices? What are you doing with the next generation of devices you're developing? You're going to make the same mistakes you made last generation. And so this 1-2 punch of like security researchers coming out and their threats of suing them not working, and then the FDA saying, we care about this and you should too, or we're not going to approve your devices and you're going to lose millions and millions of dollars, has now been like building the future of medical devices to be a much better space than it was 10 years ago. So I'm optimistic, but here's the thing. A phone gets an update every year or so. You get a mobile phone, you get new hardware, new software, whatever it's going to be, right? With a medical device, it can take 5-10 years from when they first design a medical device to when it hits the market. So they might develop a medical device on an embedded operating system that's currently supported, but won't be by the time it hits the market. It'll actually not be supported anymore. And so that long delay in from conception to when it hits the market makes it really hard to change the posture of medical device cybersecurity quickly. It's a slow roll. So sorry about the long answer, but that
no, it's perfect. It's a perfect answer. It is a perfect answer. So now
I think nowadays
I'm just saying. So now is there somebody at the FDA who understands this stuff enough, just like you, Christian, to say, "Oh, I'm approving or disapproving this medical device"?
So I'm not paid by the FDA. I have no conflict with the FDA, but I'll say, and I'm also, as a hacker, and all of us, we're pretty skeptical of government bureaucracy, right? Like, so a big part of being a hacker is like, hey, like the government. No, we don't like the government. But I will say the FDA has done a fantastic job of doing a couple things. Number one, getting people there that care and know about cyber. So Suzanne Schwartz she's an amazing human being. She works for the FDA, and she's built this entire team of people at the FDA to focus on this issue. And so it's an institutional priority, number one. Number two, they did a great thing. They engaged with hackers. They weren't scared of them. They would they come to DEFCON. They come to other security conferences. When Billy Rios was giving his pacemaker hacking talk at Blackhat, at the Q&A, Suzanne Schwartz from the FDA gets up to the microphone, first to the microphone, and says, us at the FDA, we support security research. We appreciate what you do, and we're sorry that you had to deal with all of this runaround from the device manufacturer. Thank you.
That's pretty amazing.
Yeah, that's amazing. You have a government agency officially coming up and saying, we support hackers hacking medical devices to make them safer. That's huge. So that's just a couple examples of the great work the FDA has done. And the FDA actually has the jurisdiction, the chops, the gusto that device manufacturers will listen to them, because if the FDA doesn't approve their device, they're out millions of dollars. You know, this is a big deal. So it's a rare success story, in my opinion, of a government agency being able to really change the policy around something cyber for the better. And so with that, and device manufacturers, you know, generally coming around to how important this is, I'm hopeful that the future of medical devices is going to be better than it was 10 years ago.
And, you know, if you don't mind, I'll wear my tinfoil hat for a little bit and ask you this. You know, do you think that there's, you know, some backdoors that are planted by these medical devices for access by certain 3 letters acronyms, just in case they need to do a covert operation on somebody? Is that a possibility, in your expert opinion?
Oh, yeah. So
I don't know. It's a tough question.
A Stuxnet for some medical device.
Yep. You got it.
No, it's a good question. I also carry my tinfoil hat in my back pocket. I'll say we have no evidence of such a thing, right? So we've never heard of some government agency actually doing this. But I will say that I could see it being a target for state actors for sure, right? So I don't know which ones, but the ability to easily hack an embedded device that could support the life of an ambassador or some type of high priority person seems like a natural focus. I will say that we also have one public report that Dick Cheney, the former vice president under Bush, went back into surgery to get portions of his pacemakers deactivated so that it could not pose a risk to him if someone tried to kill him. So that's one report that we have of espionage potential, but we've never seen anything like that, to my knowledge, actually happen.
Christian, I have a quick question for you. So you mentioned specifically that some of the reasons inherently, but you know, from development of these medical devices, because it takes so long between the manufacturing, you know, first of all, development, research, development, manufacturing, and then launch, that the OS and the internal software is so out of date that is causing a lot of these vulnerabilities to manifest itself. In your opinion, what is the solution for that? Why can't they either have, you know, a firmware that's something that you can, you know, constantly update, or maybe, you know, design everything and then, you know, at the last 6 months or something, inject the kind of the software components associated with it? You know, what's the inherent issues with why does it take, well, why can't you just accelerate at least the software piece to match with the, you know, the modern software development, deployment, and so on?
That's a great point. I think they're starting to one part of that is culture. So medical device manufacturing is a pretty niche, both hardware and software job, right? And we need high reliability, and there's a lot of these constraints that are around developing devices to try to make them as safe as possible from a functionality standpoint, right? Like we don't tolerate in the medical device space what we would tolerate on like a web app, right? A big giant glitch that makes the core functionality not work, right? Like
case in point, we just had an issue with our SaaS platform. Imagine this was a pacemaker, we'll be out, right? Case in point.
Right. So I think the culture has. Yeah, that's exactly it. So I think the culture around medical device manufacturing has just been, it's a small community generally. The experts tend to stay in that space. And so one thing is an issue of culture. How do you transform the way that you make medical devices, knowing that a lot of these teams are pretty static? And it's really hard and expensive to just completely change your culture overnight and adopt some of these better practices when it comes to developing secure, safe software. But I will say they recognize that they have to do that. And so there has been some change in that space. So one issue is culture. Number two is who is actually going to patch the device is a really interesting question, right? So when a company makes a piece of software, they're directly interacting with their customer, right? So you buy a piece of software or some web platform, you work with them. You are getting kind of. Is your browser okay?
Yeah, I mean,
freezing. Okay, you're back now.
Yeah, just remember it's recorded locally. So whatever, if we have some issues, it would be choppy on live, but then recorded, hopefully it would be fine. Hopefully. But yeah, you come in choppy. I checked my speed. It seems to be okay. I might have to, if this continues, I might have to reboot my router as well, but hopefully not. But hopefully that's the whole point why I'm using this and not Zoom, because it records this a much higher quality locally, and then it uploads it to a separate stream. Yeah, no worries.
Sorry about that. All right, so I'll get back to the meat of it. So first thing is culture. The second thing is really going to be who patches these devices. Hospitals, for the most part, buy a lot of these larger medical devices, and then they don't become in the control of a medical device manufacturer anymore. And even if they do issue a patch, for example, to fix some issue, some vulnerability, it still requires the hospital itself to do the updating. Wow. In 2017, Congress had a task force that looked at healthcare cybersecurity, and they issued a report. This report estimated that 80% of hospitals lack a single full-time security professional on staff. I'm going to say that again. In 2017, they estimated 80% of hospitals don't even have a single security practitioner in their environment. What
do you think of the numbers today?
And if that's the case, it's probably a little bit lower. I want to say maybe it's 79%. Yeah.
and also, let me ask you this.
Maybe more.
Also with the patching thing, it comes to mind. So whenever we patch, a lot of times there's a downtime. Like when you patch your phone, you patch your system, they even tell you, they send you a message saying, hey, the system will be down for the next 5 minutes. It's not possible to do that for some of these medical devices.
That's an astute observation. I completely agree. So you have to have the people to do the patch, which, a lot of hospitals don't. Number two, even if they have the people, who are they going to prioritize patching a single legacy device, or are they going to prioritize, working on their firewall or hardening their AD or something like that, right? There are all these competing priorities and limited people. And then number three, you bring up a really good point, which is when you patch this device, there's a non-zero chance that it won't come back up, right? So there's a classic paper that was looked at, a classic paper came out. And I hate to keep harping on pacemakers, but that's where most of this research is out of. There was a paper that came out that said, like 1 in every certain 1,000 updates to a pacemaker, you try to update the firmware on these pacemakers, I forget the number, but it's like thousands of updates, it fails. And the device goes into some default mode that can hurt the patient.
Wow. And
so there's a non-zero chance that.
Those are not good statistics at all.
So
that's a really scary thing. It's not like 1 in a million. This is like 1 in a couple of thousands, which basically means you're not going to wake up.
Well, there's a couple of things here. I don't know the exact number. It's definitely in the thousands. And number two, the pacemaker still works, but it goes into like a default mode. So imagine it, your pacemaker is customized like a glove to work for you and your medical condition. When it goes to its default mode, it's just supposed to make sure your heart keeps beating, essentially. So you may get short of breath, you may have some other issues. I guess at the end of the day, patching medical devices is a tricky subject. Many people fall on the side that we shouldn't patch these at all. If the risk to humans is too high, show me what the actual cyber risk is, right? So can you show me someone that's hacking these devices? Can you show me someone exploiting these vulnerabilities? And often we say no, like we can't show you anything in the wild. These are theoretical risks that researchers found. So a lot of people say until there's demonstrable patient risk, so you can show me someone who's actually being harmed by a hacker hacking a medical device, why would you risk patching it? Now that's one extreme. The other extreme is kind of more where I fall, which is, the software, these devices are more and more dependent on software. If we don't establish best practices and practice patching them, there will be a remotely exploitable vulnerability on a device, and that is going to hurt somebody. And we don't want to be trying to figure out how to patch systems we've never tried to patch before when that happens. And so I'm much more in the camp of, let's practice responsible, safe patching. Let's have some contingencies that if things should fail, they fail gracefully instead of catastrophically. But you're really touching on a lot of the really classic problems of patching that are unique to medical space, where it could hurt people. There's not a lot of people to do it. And the other thing I would say is, we don't have the fancy over-the-air updates. We don't have the central patching management from the device manufacturers. These are going to be like little one-off ad hoc patching programs. And even knowing which the medical devices are running what software and to what degree they need to be patched and what patches are available is a pretty hard thing to do.
So no patch Tuesday anytime soon for pacemakers.
Oh, I don't think so. I don't think we'll have a no patch. I will have a patch. I will say this though. I love a future where you can do over-the-air updates for some medical devices, right? Like if we takes away some of that complexity and reliance on the healthcare delivery organizations. The hospitals are just trying to help people, right? Do you want to turn them into a whole security shop too? Like, do we need just as many security practitioners in a single hospital as we do, doctors, just to make sure everything works? That's just not. It's not responsible, or it's not a good use of resources. We need to be basically building better, more resilient systems out of the box, so that we don't have to rely on some rural critical access hospital that knows nothing about cyber to do the right thing. It's an impossible proposition. It costs too much money, and that's a losing battle that we'll face from the healthcare space as we move forward.
Now, tell me this. A lot of companies these days and product manufacturers, sometimes they advertise their cybersecurity practice and the overall security of their products, whether it's services or products and so on, as a selling point. Is this something that you see ever going to, so as a patient you'll have two choices of pacemakers, coming back to that. And one advertised that they've done the right software development with SDLC with the cybersecurity controls in place, and the other one does not. And so they have not conducted like some pen testing on there. And then the patient will say, well, I don't mind paying a little extra, to make sure that I'm secure, and then potentially that somebody's not going to interfere with my pacemaker. Do you think that's ever going to happen?
That's a great question. I've been quoted as saying there should be no competitive advantage in healthcare cybersecurity. Like, I don't want billboards on the side of the freeway that say, come to our hospital. We didn't get hacked last year. Like, don't go to that hospital. Listen, I think that
maybe that's what we need though. Maybe that's well, the driving force, because like at the end of the day, it's all about money, right? Money and revenue, and even let's face it, even in the medical field, right? Especially here in the US. So maybe that's what we need. Maybe they have to have the bulletin boards.
I would agree if you could actually choose these things. You don't choose your hospital system often. Your insurance does, right? So who you work for determines what insurance you get, and therefore what hospitals you'll go to, right? So if you have Kaiser Insurance, you don't have a choice. You can't go to another hospital system that might be more secure unless you want to pay out of pocket. And that's just out of reach for so many people. When you go to a hospital and you need a pacemaker, you don't often get a choice what model pacemaker gets put in your body. It's whatever the cardiologist is used to, whatever your insurance will pay for, and whatever they have on hand at the hospital. I agree with you that we can't, I'm not a communist or a socialist. Like, I believe in market forces that drive good decisions. But the problem is that in healthcare, consumers don't have choice. You get what your insurance pays for, and they don't care if it's cyber secure or not. Your insurance cares how much it's going to cost them to buy. And your cardiologist doesn't know anything about cybersecurity. They're not going to pick one pacemaker over the other because it's more secure. They're going to pick the one that they know most, trust most, have used most in the past, right? So I would agree that the traditional ways that we use market forces to encourage good cybersecurity actions just don't work in healthcare. Unfortunately, the way that we have it set up, it's just not going to be possible. So then we're left with an alternative. Like, what do we do then? If we can't use the market to push device manufacturers to do the right thing always, or hospitals to do the right thing always, what do? Well, we share best practices. You know, healthcare is a communal good. In my opinion, it's a human right. What I don't want are certain hospitals being super cyber secure, have great programs, and them not really lifting the entire community up to be more cyber resilient. Because I'll tell you another really interesting thing. We're all in the same cyber boat when it comes to healthcare. You know, we haven't even touched ransomware, but what we know now, and what I've actually published some abstracts on, is that ransomware affects a community of hospitals, even if you yourself are not infected. If the hospital across the street from you gets hit with ransomware, they can't see patients. They can't take care. They can't give chemotherapy to cancer patients. They can't do surgeries. They can't do these things. Guess where those patients go? They don't just stay home. They go to the hospital across the street that's not hit, right? So we call this like this ecosystem effect, the cybersecurity disaster ecosystem effect, where the blast radius affects all the other hospitals. They get overwhelmed with patients, right? So what am I trying to get at after all this? It's not just how secure your hospital is or how secure your medical device is, and that's all you should care about. Instead, we're all in the same boat. And if we don't raise the cyber resiliency of the entire ecosystem of all hospitals, of all regions of care, then we're still left with a suboptimal outcome at the end, which is that people don't get the care they need when they need it because of a big cyber attack, for example. And so, you know, that leaves me to say, let's stop competing on cyber. Let's share resources, best practices. Let's learn from one another to do the right thing for people. Not just the bottom line at the hospital or the medical device manufacturer, you know, shareholder meeting.
And is that a pie in the sky, or do you feel that this is something we're slowly but surely moving towards?
Yeah, it's pie in the sky. There's no way. There's no drivers for that. There's no precedent for that. You know, honestly, I think we're unlikely to obtain something like that. But unless there's some catastrophic issue, right? Like, so if WannaCry, which took out a third of the hospitals in the United Kingdom, if WannaCry happened in the United States and we had a third of the hospitals in the United States get hit with ransomware, devastating ransomware, then I think we would see the political will to change that calculus, right? I think we would have a significant change. But until something like that happens, I really don't see it happening.
And it's no one talks about it because people are talking about SCADA systems and critical infrastructure, but yet almost, you know, this whole medical field, and as you mentioned, the impact of a cyber attack on our national healthcare grid, is something that no one talks about. Why is that? Is it because there's not enough people like yourself that are advocating for something like that, or it's just not on top of mind until something happens?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are a few things. Number one, when a power grid goes down, it's pretty public, right? There's a single point of failure, usually like a electrical company will get owned or a substation will get owned, right? And that is very public. A lot of people, it affects all these people in a region, and there's an easy focal point to say, hey, this is a linchpin in our critical infrastructure. We need to focus on it. When hospitals get hit with ransomware, generally speaking, they don't talk about it publicly. We hear reports in the newspapers, right? We hear some whisperings. These become class action lawsuits and really complicated legal matters for hospitals with a lot of liability. So they don't talk about it. We also don't have enough people measuring the effects. I'm a big fan of let's take the expert opinion out of it. Let's take out the platitudes and the classic teachings of this, and let's get some data to back up what we do and what we say. And we don't have data to talk about these impacts. We've published some very small amounts of data, but more people have to get into this game to show the actual impact before people understand the interconnectedness of it, before Congress recognizes that this is a national priority. And although healthcare is seen as critical infrastructure, it really isn't treated the same, as you've mentioned, when it comes to the interconnectedness and networks, because they're all little fiefdoms, they're all little kingdoms, they're all little private companies, and there's so many of them compared to other types of critical infrastructure like electricity and et cetera, grid. So I guess those are a couple of reasons why we're not talking about it like that. I think that conversation's changing. And I think that there are some opportunities for certain leaders in this space to emerge, different federal agencies to step up to the plate and own this. I don't think it's going to just be CISA. I think it needs to be HHS and ASPR and a few other like large organizations in the Fed that really move this, and they're working on this. I just think it's a really hard thing. It's a really hard problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it seems that there not enough emphasis specifically on this area, despite the fact that it's just as vulnerable, if not more vulnerable than SCADA for attacks, for example, from nation state. What if exactly, what you just mentioned, what if half our hospitals are going to get disabled by a nation state malware or some sort of like mechanism that does that? And then combine that with, maybe offensive or other type, it's always in Russia and Ukraine, it's the first time that kinetic warfare was combined with cyber warfare. And we're going to start seeing that more and more. And then again, this whole medical area is vulnerable and critical at the same time. So hopefully, maybe some of this conversation would float somewhere for somebody to listen to. And let me ask you this, and we're going over time, and I really appreciate that, Dr. Dameff.
I do have a meeting. I'm so sorry. I do have to run like very, very soon.
Okay, so we'll just wrap up. No worries. Just wrap up with since you were a philosophy major and you have that mindset. There's a lot of AI, machine learning now incorporated into the medical field. Do you have any concerns from if you put your philosopher hat, that decisions that are going to be made, or decisions support by AI system would not be the right ones because somebody made the wrong decision in terms of how to program these?
That is a brilliant insight. So I want to say one of the biggest emerging threats, or threats that are already here, is adversarial machine learning when it comes to medicine. That's where the innovation is really happening in a lot of the medical space. That's where most of the startups are using machine learning algorithms to improve healthcare delivery. And what does that mean? It means let's take a critical appraisal of our infrastructure that we use to derive these, very valuable algorithms, and we realize that they're pretty poorly secured. So whether or not you're attacking the actual data sets themselves, the ground truth of which you train an algorithm, or you attack the infrastructure, it's just terrifying to think about the implications at mass scale of attacking healthcare machine learning algorithms. Because what you do is you can very intelligently, and there's a rich literature base in this, and experts that have been talking about this for years, you can attack healthcare AI algorithms in a way that is not very obvious the impact to certain groups. You can poison them in a way that they only harm certain types of people that have certain type of phenotypes or certain types of genetics, whatever it may be. In the future, where doctors, hospital systems are even more reliant on them to make decisions, just opens us up to catastrophic failure and or systemic issues of injuring particular specific populations of people. I think you're right on the money here. We're more and more dependent on these things for decision support. That's not going away. The infrastructure's horribly secured, and as a consequence, intelligent adversaries that wish to really take advantage of this are mopping up right now. Now, do we have evidence of that in clinical practice? We don't. We have lots of great literature to show that that is possible and not in some ways trivial, and that's a terrifying prospect for me. We really need to rethink how we approach this, because if we don't get our hands on it now, we're just going to be playing catch up, just like we did medical devices for the next 10 years. And that's something that I don't think we should accept as a community.
I wish, Dr. Dameff, I wish we had more time. Well, maybe we'll schedule a part B of this stuff, because I feel like we're just starting cracking the can, and we're going to dive in. But until then, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you for any reason, to know more about research or whatnot? Just the easiest way, and we'll wrap up.
Yeah, come hit me up on Twitter. It's probably the easiest way. I'm at CDameffMD, CDAMEFFMD. On Twitter is probably the easiest way to reach me. And then if you ever see me at a conference, most people don't call me by my name at DEFCON. I go by my handle, which is Quaddy. So if you see me at a conference, come say hi, and come say hi, and we'll hang out.
Thank you very much. So until then, thank you very much for joining. Thank you very much for the time today. Much appreciated. And I can't wait to do maybe a follow-up session again, and then hopefully host you in person in New York City sometime soon. Thank you again for taking the time. Thanks all for joining.
It was an honor. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
Take care.